Do you know it's on? See the little red light?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we're recording.
I'll be able to get little chairs.
Let me just swing over there. Like that.
Is the mic on the
Give it a
unit?
shot. Yep, the mic's right there.
And it's sensitive enough to pick up this distance.
Picking it all up.
Do you edit the tapes yourself? Or do you edit the tapes yourself? Or
I don't edit them, it's raw.
Well, I mean, is it running now?
It is running now.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. And this is not, I don't cut this out. I want to try this one, though.
You might start with one.
Let me look again. Oh man, is that my quarter? It's got my year on it. I think that was underneath. Too much shadow. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna drop that.
Don't say you're going to need that light, because that doggone thing doesn't work.
Okay. Give me your real name.
Robert W. Tieman, Sr.
What's the W stand for?
William. Two very common names.
Tieman.
Right.
When were you born?
February 4th, 1923.
Okay. Keep this with your stuff. 100 years from now, when they find that, they'll know that you've been interviewed, and this tape is on tape 26. And
I thought you said 27.
26. They'll go down to Portsmouth Public Library, and your great-greats will take a look at you.
Well, thanks for the information. That means I can tear this up in a hurry.
Yeah, you don't want anybody to know. You told me your name and your date of birth. Where were you born? Did people call you Bob?
Yeah.
Where were you born?
Here in Portsmouth.
Were you born in the hospital or?
No.
Okay, where?
Over on Summit Street, which was a family home at the time.
Okay, is that house still there?
The house is still there.
What's the address?
1300 block, I think, west side of the street. I
Okay.
don't recall the address.
Now your present address though is 1442
Layton, L-A-Y-T-O-N.
Layton Drive. Okay, and that's also in Portsmouth here.
Right.
Now, what's your occupation? Are you retired?
Fully retired.
From what? What did you retire from?
Well, I was in the wholesale grocery business, the old Midland Grocery Company, a service wholesaler, until 1980. I started there in 41, so I was there quite a few years.
Okay.
And then the last 7+ years of my working career, I was retail merchants executive director.
Okay.
And in charge of the credit bureau, the Merchants Credit Bureau.
What happened to that organization? Did they go to Chillicothe or?
Well, they started, they melded in with Chillicothe, and frankly, after I retired, I think they had switched to working out of one of the top 3 credit bureau, national credit bureaus out of Ashland, I think.
Okay.
But I don't know how viable it even is anymore.
Okay. But how much education do you have?
12 years.
That would be high school.
4 years at PHS.
Okay. And what year did you graduate?
41. We have our 60th class reunion coming up next, well, October.
Okay. Do you always go to those? Or?
Oh, yeah, I think I had to miss one. I or my wife, one was in the hospital, but ever since we've had them, I think I've hit every one but one.
What are some of the names of some of the people that graduated with you?
Jean Sheets, who is Dr. Jerry Sheets, Jerome Sheets' wife. Helen Bradford Schmidt, Raymond Schmidt's wife. She just lost her husband about a week ago. Joe Babcock, Dr. Babcock.
Dr. Babcock. His son has his...
yeah. I don't know whether Joe's still practicing or not.
I think
he's fully retired.
Yeah. Let me ask you also, are you married, single, divorced, widowed,
I'm a
separated?
widower. My wife's name was Helen, and I lost her almost 5 years ago.
I see. I try to get a little genealogical line here. What were your parents' names?
My father's name was William G. Tieman. He worked for the old Portsmouth Pure Milk Company.
Pure Milk Company.
Yeah,
that was in
down on Clay Street at Galliot. And my mother was Shively. That's her maiden name. And they both moved out of Adams County into Portsmouth shortly after the turn of the century.
What part of Adams County, like Blue Creek or maybe?
Yeah, that area, Blue Creek.
Okay.
Relatives down there, and then...
my relatives are from Blue Creek also, that area.
Well, small world.
Yeah, it is.
Small
How about
world.
that?
And then my mother had relatives in West Union area.
Okay. Well, what were your mother's... Now, tell me your mother's name again. Shively.
Right, Rosella Shively.
Rosella. What were her parents' names?
Oh boy.
You didn't know there'd be a test, did you?
No, I didn't. And this is going to show you how weak I am on genealogy.
Okay.
I can't honestly tell you my grandparents because they were both deceased.
Okay.
Before I was even born.
How about your father's parents' names?
Well, my grandfather Tieman was named Henry Tieman.
Henry Tieman.
And my father was one of 4 sons.
Mm-hmm.
William was his name, Bill. And then my grandma Tieman was Wilhelmina.
Okay.
Strictly Dutch, both of them.
Okay.
And they came over from the old...
Did they?
Yeah.
There's somebody at the door. I wonder if that's... as we know, we'll tell the people on tape here when they're watching this 200 years ago, that somebody from the paper, Portsmouth Times, might be here. Check it out.
That's the case.
Is that the case? Come on in. Is that who we're expecting?
Well,
yeah, come on in.
That's not Sarah.
That's not Sarah. There's Sarah. Fun then. Okay, we were answering the door.
This is going to be some tape.
Yeah.
Shane walking in front of...
That's all right. We're going to have a party here. We've got our guests already arrived.
John's doing the interview.
Well, you were telling me about your
Yeah.
parents and your father's parents' names, and can you go back to maybe your great-grandparents? Do you know their
No.
names? Okay.
I can't go that far back.
Okay. Now let's go in the other direction here, or let's go laterally. Let me put it that way. Your wife's name was
Payne.
okay. What was her first name?
Helen.
Helen Payne. And what were her parents' names?
His name was Jewel, J.C. Payne,
Mm-hmm.
and her mother's name was Thelma.
Okay. Where were they from?
They were from Kentucky, actually,
All right.
down around the Paris area.
Okay. And her mother's maiden name again?
Bentley.
Bentley. Do you know her grandparents' name?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Let's go in the other direction now, or let me ask you this then. How many children did you and your wife have?
Two boys.
Okay. What were their names?
Bob Jr.
Uh-huh.
and then Shane.
Okay.
Gary.
Gary?
I'm sorry, I've done it again.
All right.
Bob Jr. and Gary.
Gary, okay. Now, Bob, where is he? What does he do?
He lives in Lucasville, works out the A plant. He's a millwright.
Okay. And Gary, what does he do?
Well, he used to own a shake shop until he sold it.
Okay.
And now he's, well, I don't know whether you call it semi-retired or what, but he works for a friend of his down at the campground at Friendship.
Oh, I see. Now, did they have any children? Gary have any children?
Gary has 3.
Okay. What are their names?
Shane, of course. I got it right this time.
You mean that guy?
That guy. And then his sister, Joanna.
Uh-huh.
And then Gary also has our youngest grandchild, Clark.
Clark. Right. Now, do any of those children have children?
No.
You say your children's name are Gary and Robert.
Right.
And now, does Robert have children?
Yes.
Okay. What are their names?
He has a boy and a girl,
Uh-huh.
Scott and Amy.
Do they have children?
No.
Now, let me ask you about when you went in the service. Did you go in the Army, Navy, Air Force?
Army.
Army? When did you go in the Army?
I went in service and along with a busload of other young kids, about 19 years old,
Okay.
in early January of '43.
All right. So you went in about a year or so, or a couple of years after Pearl Harbor.
That's right, yeah.
Where were you when Pearl Harbor happened? What were you doing and all that sort of
Well, I'll tell you what, I remember a buddy of mine, in '41, I was 18 years old, just out of high school, and we were driving around the city in a car that my buddy was contemplating buying. I never will forget it. I had her car radio on and heard about Pearl Harbor.
In the radio, in the car, over the radio?
On the radio.
Okay. Well, when you heard that, what did you think? Like, where's Pearl Harbor, or something like that?
That's basically about it. And there again, at that age, naive, the thought of a dreaded world war didn't really hit, as I remember the incident. The fact, just headlines, that we were bombed by Japan.
What was your buddy's name?
Mike Haas.
Mike Haas, okay. Did he buy the car?
I can't tell you.
What kind of car was it?
I think it was a Ford.
All right. So after you're driving around in the car, you're bound to go home or back to the dealer or something, and when you did that, you're back to the dealer now. Are people talking about this thing, or
You're pinpointing too much, John.
Okay.
I can't relate to that at all.
Well, what happened? Let me ask you this. I'll put it. What happened then?
What happened then? Well, I went to work for my company, Midland Grocery Company, as a night billing clerk.
Okay.
I replaced a man who had been drafted.
Oh, I see.
That's the job I got, is when he left the company and went into service, the Army. And then I worked as a night billing clerk for about a year, 6 months or so. And then I went to work in the office during the day, then elevated to where I was a substitute salesman. And I was a kid without a car.
Oh, no.
And my parents didn't even own a car.
Oh, no.
And when I was given a company car to drive, when I went out as a substitute salesman, I felt pretty doggone important.
Did you get a lot of girlfriends for having a car then?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really.
When did you get married?
Got married on furlough. And
While you were in the service?
August the 6th, 1944. I met my wife in 41.
You did? Did you go to school with her, or where was she from?
She's from Portsmouth, and she went to PHS as I did, but we didn't know each other in school.
Oh, you didn't know?
So she was in a sorority, and I was in a brother fraternity.
A high school sorority?
Christian, Kappa Sigma Pi and Phi Beta Pi.
Okay.
Christian fraternity and sorority. And I met her at a Halloween party in 1941.
41 at a holiday, so it'd
And
be...
we had our first date on Christmas evening, 1941.
Okay. It took you a long time to get up the courage to ask her, it sounds like. Is that what you mean?
Well, I'll tell you, not necessarily.
Okay.
Of course, we dated in 1942 until I left for the service in January, but I didn't ask her to marry me at that time. But we had pretty much an understanding that we would eventually get married. And then I came home on a 3-day pass for Christmas time in '43 and bought a ring and gave her the ring that night. She didn't even know I was coming back. I was on a 50-mile radius pass, and if you're changing buses in Winston-Salem, out of Wilmington, North Carolina, where I was stationed.
You mean it's
And
about 50 miles down there?
50 miles from Wilmington. I was on a 50-mile radius, 3-day pass. And I had to change buses in Winston-Salem. MPs were all over the bus depot.
I see.
And fortunately, I guess because it was Christmas time, no one asked to see my furlough papers or what have you.
Good.
But I was sweating, believe me.
Okay.
And I was a little late getting back, but I gave my wife her engagement ring Christmas, 43, and we were married when I got furlough in August of 44.
Well, when did you go into the Army? What was your enlistment date? Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted and sworn in on January the 9th, and we were given a week, and then went across the bridge, which is no longer here, to the little C&O train station over there, and a buddy and I sat side by side and to Fort Thomas Induction Center down in Cincinnati, or across the river from Cincinnati.
When were you discharged?
March of 46.
What was your rank when you were discharged?
Staff sergeant.
Now, where did you go for your basic training?
Went to Camp Wallace, Texas, which was between Houston and Galveston.
Before then, had you ever been anywhere out of Portsmouth before?
I went in service in January of 43. I had my birthday on the 4th of February, so I was still 19 years old when I went in service. And for a 19-year-old with family with no car, I think the farthest I had ever been away from home was Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
If I got to go to Cincinnati or Columbus for the day, I was in heaven.
And then you end up in Texas.
And I ended up in Texas, and I became a world traveler of sorts before it was all over. But that's a point I'd like to make, John.
Okay.
I think an awful lot of young fellows my age who grew up in the Depression, awful lot of us hadn't been too far from home. And believe me, it was a whole new world from the time I left South Shore on the train, beginning with the induction center down at Fort Thomas. The people that you meet, the type of people, the mix that you're thrown in with and live with in a barracks, it's an education, believe me.
What was the name of the camp?
Camp Wallace.
Camp Wallace. Have you ever been back?
Been back. Wife and I were on vacation and made a point. We were down in Texas, made a point to come back that way, and the only thing I remember seeing, there was one barracks building sitting out in the middle of the field, and there was a windsock up on a pole with the wind blowing, and that thing was standing out horizontal. But I remember saying to my wife at the time, I said, Camp Wallace has really changed.
Well, then after Camp Wallace, what did you do? What happened then?
Well, I was fortunate. We did our 13 weeks basic training at Camp Wallace. And I was in anti-aircraft. And I had the distinct honor of being in a search fight battalion, which meant when we all stood retreat at 5 or 5:30 in the evening, the guys in the gunnery battalions, their day was over. They'd go to the PX. But we would stand for retreat, and the first sergeant would bellow out, searchlight drill, 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., depending. We had to wait till night. But we worked nights, and everybody else got to go to the PX. We used to laugh about that after the fact, but it wasn't very funny at the time.
It wasn't funny, I'd say.
But after basic training, they sent me to California, Los Angeles.
Okay.
I went to a civilian school out there.
For what purpose?
To become a radio operator mechanic. And had civilian instructors. And I was I think at the time, I was in class number 60. And when I became proficient enough and could take the required number of words per minute on Morse code, I automatically qualified as a T5, a corporal. And then after the school was over and I graduated, then they put me on a train and shipped me clear back to Camp Polk.
It's in Louisiana,
No, not Camp Polk, but Camp Davis, North Carolina, which was a few miles out of Wilmington.
Okay.
And then when the Allies got the upper hand in the air, they started whittling down anti-aircraft battalions, cutting forces. Then they started shipping us out. We went either to the infantry or quartermaster or the engineers. And I wound up with the engineers at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And I was there to help form the 488th Engineer Light Ponton Company.
Like what?
Ponton.
What's that?
Well, you would say pontoon.
Pontoon. Ponton.
We were a bridge company, but we heard from day one it's Ponton, spelled with one O. But obviously pneumatic bridges, floats, and that's what we did our training in the engineers.
So did you ever use this training as a radio operator, repair person?
Well, I went in under that classification. I was NCO and a buck sergeant at the time, and I was communications chief of the outfit. So I had my own crew, half dozen fellows that made our. We didn't have anything but walkie-talkies and telephones was all we had.
You were at Fort Jackson, and was it Fort Jackson or Camp Jackson?
Fort Jackson.
Fort Jackson in South Carolina. And is that the last camp you were at before you went overseas?
No. Wife and I got married in August, went back to Fort Jackson.
Did you take her with you?
She went back with me. We went through the USO and got a room in a two-story house with a lovely couple who we went back after the war and visited.
Is that right?
But I left her at Fort Jackson, Columbia, South Carolina, and we shipped out to Camp Polk, Louisiana.
I see.
And that's where we took our final maneuvers before we shipped out overseas.
What unit did you finally hook up with? What?
Well, you know, it's interesting because actually we went all through the war and we were a separate company, the 488th Engineer Light Ponton Company, but we were part of the 6th Corps of the 7th Army.
Okay.
We were down in Bavaria, southern Germany.
Now you're leaving from Fort Polk and you're going by ship, I assume.
Right.
Do you remember the name of the ship?
The SS Brazil.
Brazil.
Which was an old luxury liner, so we were told. It was a huge ship. And still, some of the guys got seasick. I fortunately didn't. But we were about, I think it was about 13 days. We shipped out of Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, New York Harbor.
So you went from Fort Polk up to Camp
Right.
Kilmer.
And then that was debarkation, the camp. And then it's a heck of a feeling to see the Statue of Liberty just fading in the background.
Okay. Did you have the opportunity to see it in the other direction when you came back? When you came back from Europe, you came on a ship.
Right.
Where did you
well, we came back on a Liberty ship.
Liberty ship?
And believe me, after the experience going over, it was like a wash tub. I think everybody on that ship had to get their sea legs, so to speak.
Did you come back to the same place, Camp Kilmer?
Came back Camp Kilmer.
That's what I mean. Then you saw the Statue of Liberty growing on the
That's right. That's right.
You
Altogether different feeling, believe me.
How many soldiers on the Brazil? How many did it take over? 1,000 or more?
Oh, I'd say every bit of that, probably more. Hammocks hanging all over the place.
You say it was a 13-day trip? Were you in storms or anything like that?
No, part of a convoy, which was practice procedure at that time, and fortunately, we didn't have a bit of trouble. But we were part of we had a convoy escort, and we were disappointed. We had always heard after the fact that we were, if not the first, one of the first ships to disembark at Le Havre, France. We bypassed England altogether, so we were disappointed.
You wanted to go to England?
I wanted to go to England because I talked to other soldiers and buddies that were already over there. I'd written to or heard from, and they got to see England at least, but they took us right into Le Havre, France.
When you were in the service, did you meet anybody from this area? Or you were in Europe or in Fort
Yeah, it's
Polk,
ironic you mention that because I grew up on Benton Avenue here in Portsmouth. And about 4 doors up the street, 2 of my buddies, closest buddies, grew up with, we rode scooters together, played pass and touch, played softball, spent the summers in Mountain Park, and just buddies. And I'm standing at the rail on the Brazil going over.
Mm-hmm.
And first thing I know, I hear somebody say, "Hi, Bob." And I turn, and here's Earl Kinker, one of my buddies. And it just shows you how small the world is.
Well, what happened with Earl?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I haven't seen him since then.
Well, you get to Le Havre, that's France, and you get off the ship, and what happens to you then?
Well, it wasn't daylight when we got off the ship. They loaded us onto trucks, and we laughed about the fact that we were like every other GI. We were besieged with training films, and they were talking about mines.
Mm-hmm.
Watch your step. Mines are along the edge of the road and everything. And we joked about the fact, of course, if you're in the back of a 2.5-ton GI truck, you got one view, that's out the rear end.
Mm-hmm.
2 parallel roads on each side, and a quartermaster was our truck driver, people from quartermaster branch. And we were all over that road, believe me.
Oh.
He bounced all over that road. We were off the road, I think, as much as we were on it. At least it seemed that way. But we wound up at a huge tent city they called Camp Lucky Strike.
Mm-hmm.
And wasn't daylight yet. And we rolled out of the truck, and we had our bedrolls, and we were assigned a squad tent, which consisted of about 8 men. And had a couple of kerosene heaters, one in each end of the tent.
About what time of year was this then?
January.
You were
This was
January of 44?
There was snow on the ground.
Okay.
They had pitched that tent right over snow.
Uh-huh.
So some of us just unrolled our bedroll or a sleeping bag and crawled in. We were dead tired. I wasn't one of them, but some of them did, right on the snow. And first thing you know, somebody sticks their head in the flap of the entrance of the tent and said, "Draw bunks, second tent up," for argument's sake. So we all go and get a bunk and put the bunk together. And those of us that hadn't laid on the ground yet, we had a nice dry sleeping bag to lay on the bunk. But I'm not exaggerating. When morning came, and that was an experience in itself, because the Battle of the Bulge, I don't know whether it was over or not, but it was certainly winding down. But we heard this commotion, and some guy from the medical corps comes into our tent. Now keep in mind that we went into the tent in the night. We didn't know anything about our surroundings. Well, as it happened, there was a medical corps outfit right next to us. So we hear this commotion. A guy comes in, he's got a helmet. He says, "Give me your sulfa bag, your sulfa pack off of our gun belts." And what's going on? Never mind, just give me your sulfa. So we all did that.
Sulfa is a medicine.
Well, yeah, it was a little pouch. It was part of our...
first aid kit, wasn't it?
Had first aid kits. What it had, a little gauze bandage and the sulfa drug and what have you. And so I'm not exaggerating, but our initiation, or our greeting in France, was we walk out of the tent to see what's going on, and there are Army doctors standing there categorizing. They look at a soldier on a stretcher, point over here, look at another point over here. Some were wounded, some were dead, and that was our initiation, so to speak, to Europe.
But this must have been about 1945 then, you say, was that?
That's
45?
right, January 45.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, after that then, did you have any contact with the French?
Yeah, quite a bit.
How did they treat you?
Very well.
Did they?
Yeah.
Did you go into Paris?
No, I never did make Paris. We made Rouen, and French people, it was very interesting. They talked about the old, and I remember this going through my mind. I liked history when I was a kid in school. Talk about the old world, and America was a new world. I just had visions of, boy, I have seen the old world. 1945, the ox carts, two-wheel carts. Here's a livery stable, built right in as part of the house. And very primitive. And then by contrast, when we hit Germany and saw what amounted to be the first interstate I ever saw in my life, it was Autobahns, we were just flabbergasted.
Well, from Camp Lucky Strike, how long were you there at the camp?
Oh, I'd say a matter of 2 or 3 weeks at the very most.
And is that where you're waiting assignment, or,
Yeah.
or what's the deal?
Well, that's when I was in headquarters company, and being communication chief, I was in headquarters office quite a bit. I worked out of the office, so I had pretty good access and familiarity with the old man, who was Captain Stubbings. Heck of a nice guy. He was from over in New York State somewhere, I think. But we would get a directive as to where we were to be at a certain time of the day and what have you. But fortunately, and I've been so grateful for this, by and large, early 45, and the war ended over there in May of 45. Jerry was pretty much on the run.
Where did you go after Lucky Strike then?
Well, after Lucky Strike, we wound up hitting a little town when President Roosevelt died. We were in a little village called Mossbeck, Germany. We had been there for a couple of weeks. And then we hit Mannheim and Oberammergau. I never in my life up to that time have ever heard of the Passion Play. But the Passion Play came about in Oberammergau, Germany. Outdoor theater with a shell-like stage, and I think it was every 10 years they would do the Passion Play. And of course they missed part of the cycle during the war, but we spent quite a bit of time in Oberammergau. I'm not sure, but I think the war may have even been over, but it was winding down by that time.
Well, now from Camp Lucky Strike, we're talking about January. And then in Mannheim is April, about April, is that when you were? What happened?
We were in Roermann, Holland, I think. I'm trying to think, get my facts together, but we were in Roermann, Holland in early 45. Okay. And we were billeted in a bicycle factory.
You know, you're traveling by truck, of course,
right,
as you go
right,
to these
right.
places. And when you get to a place like Holland, Roermann, Holland, what do you do? What's your job?
Well, I did clerical work in the orderly room myself.
Quartermaster or engineer?
Well, engineers.
Engineer.
And then, of course, we had a supply sergeant. And we had a first sergeant. The first sergeant and I were pretty close buddies. And heck of a nice guy. And we just, to be honest with you, just kind of put in time by this time. But while we were moving, our job when the war was still on and when we were moving from point to point, our job was to supply the combat engineers.
I see.
We started drilling Bailey Bridge. We didn't have a thing to do with pneumatic bridges at all.
What you were trained on?
What we were trained on. We joked about the fact, well, snafu, same old Army, nothing changes. We take all this training in pneumatic floating bridges, and then when we get over there, we draw Bailey Bridge, which the way I always described it, it was invented and perfected by the British, and I guess a man named Bailey, but it was in sections. So I used to think of it in terms of an erector set. When you were a kid and played with an erector set. It was in sections and panels and what have you. For the 488's job, our obligation was to truck the bridge up to the site, and then the combat engineers would build it.
Would build the bridge.
Yep.
Okay. So then you were getting up close to the front, I assume, that sort of thing. And after you got into Germany, how did the Germans relate to you? How did you get along with them?
Well, to be honest with you, about the best answer I could give you, there was no such thing as a Nazi. Nobody was a Nazi.
Never heard of Hitler.
They never heard of Hitler.
Who's that guy?
They didn't want any part of Hitler and so on.
Who's that?
But
okay.
I know when my outfit, they started disbanding it with the point system. the war was over and they started sending guys home. They disbanded the 488th, and I wound up with the 38th Engineer Combat Battalion. And I remember distinctly, we used to draw PWs every morning. They would come in, and we had a pair of them. One was real tall.
PWs being prisoners
of
war.
war, German prisoners of war.
They would help you out?
They would help us out. And every morning, the truck would go around and make the circle and drop off guys at the station that they were assigned to work. And we used to call them Mutt and Jeff.
Mutt and Jeff.
In the orderly room, I was Sergeant Major of the battalion, and in headquarters orderly room. And I can see them yet. They would walk in the morning. Good morning, Sergeant. One had a coffee can or something, and he would dip his hand in it and sprinkle the floor with water, and then Jeff would come right along behind him sweeping. That was a ritual every morning. They would sweep the orderly room. But I kind of had it made. I mean, they kept our quarters for us, made our beds, did our laundry. So, but they couldn't be nice enough, and they were treated. My limited experience with PWs, German PWs, is they were treated well.
Did you go into any of the villages, German villages?
Yeah.
What was your reception and experience like in that?
Cordial, because at that time they had no recourse but to be cordial. We didn't confront soldiers per se. We used to send a truck up to the bridge site, and that truck would come back just marked all over with shrapnel and what have you. So they were under fire, and the only thing we got was a little strafing, basically. But as far as accosting Germans in uniform, thank God I didn't have any of that to contend with.
I've heard some people say that the Germans were more polite and cordial, as you say, than the French were. Did you have that experience or not?
Well, I don't want to open up a can of worms. Somebody might have
French here.
French connections, but I've made the remark more than once, and this the best way I can explain it. You would see a Frenchman behind a horse with a plow, horse drawing a plow, and he would plow around a shell hole.
He'd plow around what?
He would plow around a shell hole, a crater that a bomb had made.
Right, he'd plow around it.
He would plow around it. But the Dutch and the Germans, they would fill in the crater and plow their field.
Well, they'd have more of a field then,
wouldn't they? They were, to me, much more industrious. I mean, I see movies showing the French as being fun-loving people, and frankly, that's the way I saw it. Basically, they enjoyed life, and but the Dutch people and the German people were much more serious and industrious.
How long were you there then? When did you leave Germany? You said you were in Bavaria?
Bavaria,
okay,
and then we wound up, when they started breaking the outfit up, I wound up with the 38th Engineer Combat Battalion up around Antwerp, Belgium. And when they finally got down to my 50 points and I got to come home in March of '46, I shipped out of Antwerp.
While you were in Bavaria, did you visit, I think Hitler's Berchtesgaden was there or something, I'm not sure.
No, we weren't even, we were probably a lot closer than I thought. I'll tell you one thing that the old man did do, the captain. First of all, we built a softball field after the war was over. And the natives, with their size, they cut it down for us. And one little experience I'll never forget. Now, keep in mind, we were an engineer outfit. And I think my CO was an engineer. But he called me in. He said, "Sergeant, we've got that softball field out there, and we've got a league going, keeping the guys busy, something to do." He said, "Flagpole would look awful doggone nice." So I remember they cut a tree, got a nice straight tree, and put in place, I don't know, 30-foot high, 40-foot high flagpole. The old man called me in one day, and I was communication chief. And part of our equipment, we had these gaffs that we could go up a telephone pole or a tree or whatever. Sergeant, we got the pole up, we'll have a flag on it. But we don't have a pulley on it. And I knew him well enough, and it was one of those moments when I just looked at him and grinned. I said, well, sir, we're an engineer outfit. It was your job to see that there was a pulley put on that pole before we set it in the ground. I said, now you want me? I said, I don't want to climb that thing to put a pulley on it, and I don't want to ask any of my men to. So the point is, when we left there, the pole was still standing and it never had a flag.
No flag. A flagless flagpole.
Flagless flagpole.
Well, you went to Antwerp, and then you got on a Liberty ship.
Right.
Did you come straight home, or did they stop in England for you?
No, we came straight home from Antwerp. And there again, we boarded during the night. It seemed to me like it was about 4 o'clock in the morning when we boarded. And we went to bed, hammocks, and woke up, and well, I'm a little ahead of myself because yeah, it was when we went over, we boarded in the morning. When we came back, we boarded in the afternoon because we got an evening meal, and I'll never forget that experience. We kidded with the sailors, and they told us that they ate that way every day. But sliced fresh bread, for example.
You mean the meal was good, or was it
bad? Oh, it was outstanding. I mean, we'd forgotten what we had eaten in the field. We'd eaten our share of K rations and C rations. The C rations were in a tin can with the contents stenciled on the lid. And our mess sergeant, like any mess sergeant in the field, had a great big kettle, heated, just throw all these cans in there. So they'd bail one out and hand to you. You didn't know whether you were going to be eating spaghetti or beans or what you were going to be eating, but that was a C ration. And then K rations were dry crackers, cheese, a little piece of ham salad or something, or sausage. But when we hit that ship and had our evening meal, we were used to bread in the field. First of all, it was solid loaves, and always in a gunny sack. Any number of loaves in a gunny sack. Well, you'd wind up pulling hair from the gunny sack out of the bread sometimes. See, of course, it was all hand sliced. So we get on board ship and fresh sliced bread. And the thing that impressed me was the fresh fruit. All the bananas and oranges, that type of thing that you wanted. And we hadn't seen any of that for forever.
And those sailors lied to you and said they ate like that all the time.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, what'd you eat like then for the next 13 days?
To be honest with you, I don't really remember. I just know we had good food all the way over. And I think it was about 2 or 3 days out, I didn't want any part of food because on that Liberty ship.
Did you get seasick?
I got sick as a dog coming home. Practically everybody did. But then once I got my sea legs, it was like a coaster ride at a roller coaster park. Couldn't get rough enough. But I mean, you'd be standing at the rail, and I'm not exaggerating, of course, but you'd look, and everything's green, the water. Next time you look, it's all blue to the sky. I mean, it just rolled that mud sea. But we had good food coming home once I got my stomach and could enjoy it.
So now you get home and you see the Statue of Liberty in the other direction now, and you get off the ship. What did you do then?
Well, we were barracked, of course, and we weren't there very long before they shipped us out, thank gosh. But I remember our evening meal.
Did your wife meet you there when you got off?
No.
When did you see her then the next time?
Here in Portsmouth, down at the passenger station.
Okay.
When I got home on the train.
Is that the N&W station down here?
The N&W station, yeah. But a memory I had when we had our first meal, which was evening supper, in the cafeteria at Camp Kilmer. The whole serving, it was a cafeteria style, and the whole serving line was manned with German PWs.
Oh, really?
And I didn't even know they'd shipped PWs back to America, but they had. Okay. But these guys were all standing there, had the letter P on their back, and they were German PWs serving. Well, we got a steak, first steak we had had for over a year.
Well, do you remember the time that, the date that you got off the train here at the passenger station and there's your wife? Remember that day?
I think I was, well, when we left Camp Kilmer, we came by train over to Camp Atterbury, Indiana, which is just out of Indianapolis a few miles. That was the separation center, Camp Atterbury. And I remember when we went through Columbus, I made a remark to one of my buddies. I said, if this train stopped long enough to let me off, I'd walk to Portsmouth. But we were mustered out at Camp Atterbury, and I think that was around the 20th of March. And
took about a day to get back.
It seemed that way. I was on, well, they trucked us into Indianapolis, put us on a train to Cincinnati, and then we took, we got a local, stopped at every little town between Cincinnati and Portsmouth, Mount Orb, Sardinia, and I remember saying to the conductor, I said, is this train ever going to get to Portsmouth? And he said, we'll make it. He says, how long's it been since you've been home? And I said, well, August of last year. And he said, we'll make it. And bless her heart, when I got off the train, my wife was standing in the lobby down at the train station.
How did she know that you were going to be there?
I've been able to communicate and call her.
Did you have your uniform on when you got off the train?
Plus duffel bag.
What did you do with your uniform? Where is your uniform?
It's upstairs.
Is it?
Probably full of mothballs. Okay. And darn thing shrunk, though. You know that, John?
They do that, don't they?
Yeah, it shrunk. But I went downtown as soon as I could to get a suit. And I couldn't even find a suit. Well, I found one suit at the old Criterion. Pearl Newman was the owner of the Criterion at that time, which was down on the Esplanade. And I got this one suit, which was one that I normally wouldn't have bought, but it was the only thing he had that fit me. And it had a button fly on it, didn't even have a zipper on it. It was made in the wartime. Okay. I never will forget that.
What's the, did you like the Army? Did you like
some aspects of it?
What's the best thing that ever happened to you in the Army?
Well, I grew up in a disciplined home as a child. And I heard an awful lot of guys complain about the regimentation of the service. And the guy that had one stripe, he outranked you, so if he told you to do something, you do it. And some guys had trouble addressing authority. But I've got to say this, given the 1940s versus present day, there were very few rebels as such. There are young people today that just don't listen or want to be told, or they don't want to be regimented, and aren't, and won't be. But so with the discipline that I had at home as a youngster, I had very little trouble adjusting as far as authority is concerned. But you just learned right from the get-go that if you were told to do something, you just did it. You didn't even question it.
What's the worst thing that ever happened to you in the Army?
Oh, gee, I don't know. One memory I have is we had three casualties from our company. Okay. And one memory that I'll always have is that being in the orderly room, had a buddy, and he was in headquarters platoon, and I worked with him some during the day. He was a carpenter in the outfit. And he got pneumonia. And it got so bad, the old man had me drive him in, and I forget what town it was, to the hospital. And first thing I know, a few days later, we get word he died. So that was the first casualty we had. And then we had a couple of other casualties. I know we built a bridge, a wooden bridge, in I think it was Mossback, Germany, as a memorial, the Richard P. Roundy Memorial Bridge, to one of the other guys that we lost.
How did you lose him?
Pardon?
How did you lose him? An accident or?
Strafing. But
that was hostile fire then.
Yeah, hostile fire. Yeah. But I have one vivid memory of one of the guys in one of the bridge platoons that came back. Of course, the trucks came back empty. They went up and delivered. He came back empty. And he just literally rolled out of the cab of the truck. He was a Section 8. His nerves were shot completely. And all you had to do was look at his truck and you can understand why. Windshield was all shattered, and just one heck of a time.
Have you ever been back to Europe? Been
No.
to some of those places?
No.
Been to Germany?
I've been back to, driven through Columbia, of course, and Fort Jackson, but it was an established fort even before the war. And then I understand that Camp Polk is now Fort Polk. It's a permanent installation down in Louisiana. But I drove by, as I told you earlier, Camp Wallace, Texas.
Down there was that lone barracks out there
Yeah,
on the prairie.
nothing left there, but I'm sure that Fort Polk is a lot more than it was when we were there.
Do you, have you ever kept in touch with any of your friends, any of the guys that you met in the service?
They've had 6 reunions. The wonderful age of computers and what have you. A couple of the guys got searching. And in '96, the wife and I had just gotten back from vacation. Came through Asheville, North Carolina, and we were sitting in the dam, and the phone rang. Is this Robert W. Tieman? I said, yes, it is. Is this the Robert W. Tieman who was in the full 88th Engineer Lot Pumping Company? I said, it sure is. Who is this? Well, it was Paul Robinson, who lives in Asheville. I told him, I said, we were just through your town 10 days ago on vacation. And he called me to tell me that they had had, up to that time, about 3 reunions, all on this side of the country. And wanted to know, he says, now we're planning a reunion for this year in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Do you think you can make it? I cut the phone and turned to my wife. I said, would you go to Colorado Springs with me to a reunion? Well, the point is, she got sick and I lost her. And so my boys both tried to get me to go to the reunion, but I wouldn't have any part of it, just didn't want to.
And you haven't?
So I finally made my first one, which was their 5th.
Okay.
2 years ago down in San Antonio, Texas.
Well, what was it like?
It was great.
Was it?
It really was. Just a bunch of old men in 70s getting
Reliving
together.
their youth.
I fortunately bonded with another widower, and we just did things together and saw San Antonio, and they set up a hospitality room. And guys would just drop in, and we'd just sit there and chin. Their wives be present, those that had their wives with them, and we'd just talk about the fun things, which is what you always do. If you were in the war, you only remember and talk about the fun things.
Did you, when you were in the service, meet anybody famous general? Did you ever see Eisenhower or Bradley or Patton?
No.
Or any people like that?
No. And I was even trying to, I was thinking about, we weren't blessed. I think I saw 1 or 2 USO shows. And
Any
one
movie
thing I
stars?
remember about this guy, and I don't even remember his name, but he was a singer. And he started singing, I'll be home for Christmas, if only in my dreams. And I felt sorry for the guy. They literally booed him off the stage almost.
Why?
Just because he was, the lyrics and the song and melancholy mood, thousands of miles from home, and the guy stands up there, I'll be home for Christmas if only in my...
Well, maybe he would, but...
Yeah, well, the point is, I mean, the lyrics told it all, but...
was that in Europe?
That was in Europe.
Okay. Bob, is there anything else you'd like to say? You got any tattoos you'd like to talk about? Or
No tattoos.
What?
No tattoos. I'll say this.
All right.
When they separate you in the service, they give you a pin, a lapel pin for your uniform, the ruptured duck.
Yeah.
And so it was an awfully good feeling when they trucked us into the Union Station there, railroad station in Indianapolis. We get off the train, and everywhere you look, you see MPs. And obviously, they're not going to come up to you and ask to see your papers or this, that, or the other, especially if you're well. Most of the guys in Atterbury were being discharged and sent home anyway. But I was just almost challenging those guys in my mind, please come up to me and ask to see my papers.
I want to show you my ruptured duck.
But it was an awfully good feeling to be. I remember going downstairs and getting a cup of coffee, waiting for the train. And then the realization started setting in that I've got my discharge papers. I'm out of the service. I remember they gave us a thorough physical before they let us go. And I remember a guy right in front of me, dental inspection. And the conversation went something like this. The doctor told him, he said, son, your teeth are a mess. There's a way to fix them up. He says, I want out of this place. You send me home, I'll get my teeth fixed when I get home. And that was basically the attitude that we all had.
So he failed his dental exam and they wanted to keep him.
Yeah, they were going to fix his teeth up for him before they discharged him. But he wanted no part of it.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I think we pretty well covered everything.
Thanks for everything you did.
All right, John, I've enjoyed it.
I'm glad you did.
I'd be interested to see how this might look on tape.
Well, I'll give this tape to Gary, or Shane, I mean.
Yeah, give it to Gary.
And he'll make a copy of it. There he is right now. Hey, how you doing? Who's this lady? Who's this lady over here?
Oh, come on now.
I got you.
Camera at.
Okay, where'd the other person go? We lost our.
She had to be somewhere else.
We lost our dancers.
Well, she got bored early.
She has to be in Minford, I think.
Okay, I'm turning her off.
Sarah was sitting over there just gritting her teeth and shuffling, moving around.
Now,
I was reading the Stars and Stripes religiously. And one issue, all of a sudden, Sergeant Robert W. Tieman, Ohio, son, September 25. And that's how I learned that my boy, and then I got a letter from her.
and what year was that?
45. He was
David
born in
from my
September of
birthday.
45.
Mine,
And I didn't get to see him until I got home in March. So I came home not only to a new wife,
we had a
but a
baby.
new family.
That's how it was with my dad. He went to Korea in August, and in February of next year, he had a second child.
But we've reflected and we would laugh about it, but bless their hearts, her parents never said a word to me or to us. Well, now, why don't you kids wait until after the war before you get married? But she wanted to get married, and we had a nice church wedding down in Old Manly Church. Came home on furlough and got married. And then she got on a train with me and went back at the end of my furlough to Fort Jackson. And we went to the USO desk there at the station. And they gave us an address, made a phone call first. Yes, the room's still available. And we were a suburb of Columbia called Montclair, or Eau Claire, or something like that. And they were a Catholic couple.
Who was a Catholic couple?
He worked for Swan Laundry People, which was a chain of laundries in the South. And nice as they could be. And I never will forget, they got into a kind of a good-natured type of argument. And there was a young Jewish couple. He was an Air Force cadet. And they had an extra room open. So the bottom line was, old Fred says, and he said, hell, I've seen everything now. Says, we're going to have a Catholic, a Protestant, and a Jew all under the same roof. I never will forget that.
What did your parents think about you getting married at that age? And
Just accepted.
no problems.
No problems
So
at
you were
all
what,
from either
20?
family. And then she became pregnant before I shipped out. And, she always told me, she said, I was tickled to death, and it was a no-brainer when the baby was born. It was Bob Jr. Because she didn't know whether I was going to get home or not, see. My point is that it wasn't real common, but it was relatively common for couples to get married during the war.
Okay.
But I was in uniform, and she was in her white bridal gown. And,
did you have a big crowd?
Pardon?
Did you have a big crowd?
Yeah. Church wedding and well attended.
Manly is what, Methodist or?
A Methodist.
Methodist.
This was the old Manly. Manly Church now is a little stone church over on Grandview. And the old Manly that we were married in was down at the corner of 11th and Clay Street, where the bank built a branch there.
11th and Clay. I'm trying to, I don't know where Clay is.
Clay is down,
By
you know where the viaduct is in the east end?
the bars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Coming back this way 2 or 3 blocks, you got Clay Street.
Okay.
Manatee.
There's a Giuseppe.
Oh, yeah, I know where it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Giuseppe's is in the bank building now. The bank closed that branch.
That's right. I know exactly.
Is it
where
Giovanni?
is. Yeah. And there was the church there on that corner.
Yeah.
Manly
It's a big
Methodist?
frame church, and I can see the date, 1892,
Oh.
painted on one of the entranceways.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
They owned these lots out here on Grandview Avenue. I was just a kid, but it was just a joke. They'll never build on those lots. They'd owned those lots for years. So in the 50s, they bit the bullet. And,
They built on there.
they built
Where did your wife live while you were in the war?
with her parents.
That'd be here in Portsmouth, wouldn't it? Right.
They were living on Grant Street. They didn't build a home until after the war. They were renting. And they lived out on Herm's Curve, out there across from Reno's. That used to be called Herm's Curve there. Herm's had a greenhouse. Herm's Forest had a greenhouse there. And they lived in a nice cottage there on Sauter Trail or Route 23 at Herm's Curve. And that's where the wedding reception was after our wedding. And then we got to go clear to Columbus. On gas stamps, I had a brother-in-law, or my wife's uncle. He was with Standard Oil Company. He gave us some gas stamps, and other people chipped in some. I guess some of her parents, or some were probably her parents, but we took his little Plymouth and drove up to Columbus and back, spent a couple days up there.
What's the purpose of a gas stamp? What does that do for you?
Rationing.
The rationing.
If you didn't have stamps, you didn't get gas.
And you could only get a certain amount of gas with a stamp, right? How much gas could you get with a stamp?
You know, I don't know, John, but there again, I came back to Midland Grocery Company when I got out of service. And I remember telling my wife, my new wife, we lived down on 3rd Street at the time, upstairs apartment. And I told her, I said, I'm not going back to work for less than $30 a week. And so I went over and was interviewed by my boss, who had called me in my last day at work before I left for service, incidentally, and gave me a real nice, genuine leather money belt. And he said, son, there'll be a place here for you when you get back. Well, of course, they all stated that, for that matter. But I went over and talked to him about going back to the company. I mean, I just automatically knew that that's what I thought I wanted to do. So I told Helen, I said, I'm not going to go to work for less than $30 a week. So I came back home, and she said, well, are you going to work? And I said, yeah, in 30 days. I told Mr. Brown that I swore to myself overseas that if I got home, I wasn't going to turn a wheel for 30 days. I was just going to take a 30-day furlough. And he said, so I told her, I said, I start in 30 days. And she grinned. She said, you get your $30? I said, $29.50. That's gospel. That's what I went back to work at. $29.50.
Well, what did you eventually end up doing then? Did you stay there at Midland?
I stayed at Midland. I went to work for them in '41, replaced a draftee who was going into service, and went through the ranks and up the ladder, so to speak. And that was in '41, and I went back in '46, and eventually went on the road. They sent me down to Georgetown, Ohio, in Brown County as a salesman. And then Brownie brought me back in as assistant manager, and then when the company sold in 1980, I was manager of the operation. I had about 67, 68 employees.
What was it? What kind of?
A service wholesale house, groceries, Midland Grocery Company.
You would service these little mom and pop groceries and
when there was a store on every corner and one in the middle of the block, that type of thing. But we did an awful lot of institutional business as well. We sold hospitals, cafeterias, rest homes, schools. We were a many-faceted company, for that matter, with a very diversified inventory.
And they were sold in 1980?
They were sold in 1980. And then I became a number instead of a name. And I was terminated. And so then I went to work downtown for the retail merchants. I was director of the Retail Merchants Association. And of course, they owned the credit bureau, so I was manager of the credit bureau as well. But until I retired in '88.